You are here with
Andrea
and me, Annabelle. This is the Boundless Book Club, the podcast from the Emirates Literature Foundation dedicated to the good and the great books in life. Right now, among people who love books like we do, there are two things happening. Every man and his dog is putting together lists of the best books of the year, which can be a dangerous and contentious activity. This happens to coincide with a very large number of us queuing at the gift wrapping station in the bookshops, as we want to share the most profound, funny, moving, useful, or life-changing books we have ever read with our loved ones. Here with us today to discuss the books we love to give away, we have Mark Fiddes, poet and keen reader. His collection, The Rainbow Factory, is available from all the good places. Mark, welcome.
Welcome.
Hi there. It's great to be on the Boundless Book Club.
Thank you for joining us. Before we get into the books that we insist on giving the people around us and why we do it, let's take a look at the titles that feature on the 2020 Books of the Year list. And I believe Andrea has done all of the prep for this.
Oh my goodness. Don't say I never do anything for you. I've done so much research. There are so many books. So in the interest of science, I have collected as many of the titles as I could fit in before losing interest in an Excel spreadsheet for some very sophisticated analytics.
Okay.
So I've looked at the lists published by the Financial Times, the BBC, the New York Times, the Guardian, the Washington Post, and Time magazine. Shared joint first place. Two books have featured in 5 of the 6 best books of 2020 lists. And before I tell you, fake drama, can you guess?
Oh.
Would you like to guess?
A Promised Land.
Mark, what's your guess?
You've got an internet meme on your hands.
Let's do that again.
Well, this is just a straightforward commercial insight. I reckon it's Nigella's new cookbook.
That would probably have been a good guess if I hadn't focused on the list of, say, fiction or general sort of best books. I should have told you that from the start.
Okay, well, I'm gonna try and proceed what I want to talk about later. I think Piranesi by Susanna Clarke will be on the list.
Interesting. Annabelle, I know for a fact that you have read at least one of these 2 books.
Oh no, but that's non-fiction.
Okay, should I just put you out of your misery?
Please, I can't remember a single book I've read at this moment.
Okay, so Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, by all accounts absolutely wonderful, and I know you've read that.
Yes.
Yes.
Now I feel
the
stupid.
second book, which was a surprise to me, was The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, which has been recommended to me by so many people whose opinions I really respect. And she's only 30 years old, Britt Bennett, which I find, frankly, a little bit rude. But what talent.
Rude.
So, rude. So then the 2 of them, I think you have to read if they are on that many of the best book lists. And then we have a number of books that were in joint second place that were on 3 of these lists. And they include Sugar Bane by Douglas Stewart, who won the Booker Prize, This Mournable Body by Tsitsi Dangaremka, who we talked about in our previous episode about the Booker shortlist. And Mark, you'd be delighted to know, Piranesi was on 3 of the lists, so you weren't far off. Then we had Homeland Elegies by Ayad Akhtar, A Children's Bible by Lydia Millett, The Mirror and the Light, of course, by Hilary Mantel, and Jack by Marilyn Robinson. So lots of really familiar titles that I think I now feel like I have to read all of them.
I mean,
then...
Oh, yeah.
What's that?
No, I was just going to say, but that's the thing about 2020 lists is they're great when you read them and you go, oh yeah, that sounds great. That sounds great. It's like, when will I read these books?
Yeah, I know. When?
That's what comes with every list, right? There's
Yeah.
that responsibility.
Yeah, the pressure.
Just check they were right.
And I'm going to put this all in our show notes or on our, in a link to our, put a link to our blog in the show notes so you can look through the best of the best. There's one that I hadn't heard of that's been mentioned on 2 of the best lists called Where the Wild Ladies Are, which sounds absolutely amazing, which is feminist retellings of traditional Japanese folk tales, which just sounds mind-blowing. So I'm really glad I've gone through this, and I'm going to be buying lots more books that I probably won't have time to read now.
I mean, that's standard. You know, if you're not doing that, like, I would be worried about you, Andrea.
I know. To the first point that you made there, Annabelle, about buying gifts for people, and if these are the sorts of books that you would potentially want to give someone.
What, the ones that you just mentioned?
The sort of the best lists, best books of the year list books.
Because you have to establish what people may already have read. So I think you have to like know somebody fairly well, I think, to get them a book. And also the thing that's also slightly stressful about it is it's a lovely thing to give somebody a book, but there's also kind of pressure for them to like it almost, because if you don't like what they've chosen for you, it kind of implies that they don't understand you. And there's actually a chance for it to hurt the friendship more than I think with a conventional gift like a t-shirt or a pair of socks. You know, if you don't like them, oh, they got the wrong color. But if you get someone a book that isn't the right fit for them, it's like on a deeper emotional level, you don't get them. So there is a lot more pressure with getting it right. So I don't think I would just choose one of the books on the 2020 list. It would have to be a very personal, conscious decision. And there are books that I've got for people in the past that kind of tie into the choice I've got today. So I'm gonna leave that for now. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I think that's a great insight, because I go a little step further. Actually, I never give someone a book unless I've read it. Partly because, for that very reason, I just, there's a great danger of getting it terribly wrong. And on the other hand, on the upside, there's the other thing about giving books, which I think is like giving chocolate, or something you can share afterwards. Because the great thing about books is, you can give it to someone, then a month later, sit down and say, so what did you think? How did the characters come over? What did you think of the plot? And so a book is a gift that keeps on giving in that sense, because you've got that kind of, that next stage of communication where you share something around the book. And I think that's often, that's a good friendship. That's a close family member that you would do that kind of thing with.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
I think also, I wonder about the point that you made, Annabelle, that you can almost hurt the friendship if you give someone the wrong book. And I wonder if that is specifically among people who read a lot, because I feel like my mother-in-law could give me a book that would mean very little other than that they talked about it on the radio and I thought you might like it. And if I wouldn't like it, I wouldn't take that personally. Whereas if someone you're closer to gives you a book that just gets you very wrong, it would be different.
Yeah, I think honestly, I'm just being a little bit dramatic because
that's okay.
It's all the festive spirit. Everything's a little bit more intense. So yeah, I guess I'm just being a little bit more dramatic. Yes, if you give people the wrong book, you will ruin the friendship. You will end lives. Don't do it.
End in tears. Yes.
But also, I would caution anyone who actually receives a book and opens that package, and there's the book. And if your first reaction is, "Oh, wasn't really quite what I wanted," I would give it time. I would dip in and have a look. It happened to me a few Christmases ago. I got the collected works of Ted Hughes. Now, Ted Hughes, good poet, great place in the canon of 20th century tall male English northern poets. But I wasn't a great fan, to be honest. it was when I started dipping through and reading all the other stuff that people don't normally see. That's when I really began to get where he was coming from. And a lot of the kind of stereotypical, kind of pro-Plath, anti-Hughes kind of line I was taking just disappeared because I began to see other work. I began to see it in a different light. So I do caution people to just, maybe give it a day or two, persevere. If you do get a book you don't instantly love.
Yeah, that's a really, really lovely point, actually.
Do you share a novel that you love, or you try give something that you think they will love, and they're not always the same thing? But if you do share a novel that you love, and whoever you've given it to also love it, then you will have a whole different type of conversation than if you've given them a selection of short stories.
I think, yeah, all fantastic points. I think the one thing that perhaps we can agree on, though, is what not to buy people. And that's the passive-aggressive book purchase that is intended to help them mend their ways in some way. So if you think, if you think that somebody is a little bit messy and you get them the KonMari method, and they've never mentioned to you, oh, I'd really like to improve this part of my life. Can you help me? If they haven't specifically said that to you, don't get them passive aggressive. Here's a book you might like, sort your life out. That's not okay. That's not, what the spirit of Christmas or whatever holiday you celebrate is about.
Yeah. That's about
diet books. Don't buy diet books.
Yeah. Big mistake. But speaking of the books that we should be giving people, do we have specifics in mind? Like, you go to, this is what I would give people as a gift. And who would like to begin?
There's a book that was mentioned on the top 5 of the pick of the best by the newspapers. It's called Piranesi, and it's by Susanna Clarke. Now, you will remember Susanna Clarke from that blockbuster 15 years ago, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Sorrel, which I think it was Bloomsbury's second biggest seller after Harry Potter, right? They went ahead and printed 250,000 volumes of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Sorrel before it even, before it even hit the bookshops. They were so certain it was going to work. And if you remember, it was a massive doorstop. It was 800 pages. But the most incredible story of 2 dueling magicians in Regency England. So there are the ingredients of a very good Susanna Clarke story. Historical backdrop. You've got magicians. You've got otherworldliness overplayed on top of something that really happened. Now, it's been a long time since she's written anything, and this Piranesi came out this year. It's much shorter. It's 200 pages, but it's an extraordinary blend of myth, of philosophy. It's a kind of philosophical whodunit. It's probably the way I describe it. And there's the main character, Piranesi. You'll be aware maybe that Piranesi was the famous draftsman in 18th century Italy who painted all of those wonderful vistas of ruins and temples, and people on the Grand Tour brought them back. So Piranesi is the main character, and he inhabits this world of temples and vestibules and a villa of infinite number of rooms. It's an extraordinary visual idea that Susanna Clarke conjures up within the first few pages. Here is this one character wandering these marble halls, and they're full of statues and birds. There are tides ripping through the lower floors. It's an extraordinary visual feast that she conjures up. The Piranesi in question is an innocent. This Piranesi is just going around recording the tides, the millions of different statues in the different rooms, trying to map out the whole place. And we're given no more information than that. And that's why this is a whodunit in many respects, because it starts with that kind of tabula rasa, literally. There is one other character called the Other at the beginning of the book. The Other clearly comes from a different place. The Other wears modern clothes. The other holds a shiny device we think might be a mobile phone. And here we have this massive contrast between these two worlds. And through the way the plot winds towards a thrilling conclusion is that we're given clues all the way through that actually give Piranesi a little more character. We find out a little more about Piranesi and the relationship with the other. And they're like breadcrumbs that go through the book, and you're following it through. A bit like you're following, like Piranesi follows through the marble vestibules of this enormous villa with no end. It's an extraordinary book. And she does the same thing she did in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Sorrel, which is mix together the kind of, the mythological and the magical and the speculative. In fact, one critic, I think, called her kind of genre, and I think you might put a few more people in it, as a magical archaism. Mm-hmm. It's this extraordinary mix of the modern and the antique, the fabulous and the real. And as I say, it's a kind of whodunit, because in the end, everything is transformed. You go from different worlds interlace. I won't say any more than that. Mm. It's not science fiction. It is as I say, philosophical. If there is anything that is a kind of speculative inquiry, but it's really readable, very tightly written. And what I recommend is you read it in one session. Find one of those, those magical, lock yourself away for a couple of hours and start it and live in that world with Piranesi, and take Piranesi's steps. It's so absorbing. And I think also the other thing about this book right now, because it's in a kind of labyrinth, it's very appropriate for lockdown. A lot of it, if you're sort of spending a lot more time in your home, you get to know every thread of carpet. You get to reposition your plant 15 times a day. And in a sense, that's the kind of world that Piranesi is living in this kind of, this closed labyrinth where, will he escape, won't he? You only find out at the end.
Is he socially distanced from people as well, including the other?
That's so spot on. Yes, he is. At the beginning, he almost has no character, because we see the character building with the more clues and the more evidence he discovers as he's going around this enormous infinite villa. So there's a kind of otherworldliness about him. There's something of Bartleby the Scrivener. There's this kind of interest in detail and noting things down, but this distance from real contact with people.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
It does. There's a little bit of the description that reminds me of the 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle as well, with the sort of the villa and the sort of not understanding what's happening, and it just builds, and you're still kind of in the dark of what the story is.
And I'm glad it's only like 200 pages, because I kept hearing about the book. No, but you know the pain. Like, we have so many books that we have to read in a short space of time for the for the podcast, for the festival, etc. And then there's always like these 2020 lists and beyond any list, that there are these fantastic books, and you think, and particularly with this one, I thought that's exactly what I want to read. But I think in my head I was thinking, but if it's the same length as Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, there is no way that's happening before summer, So no, fantastic. I think I'm actually ready to maybe give that a go.
Who would you give it to, Mark? Would you give it to just anyone, or is there a particular type of person you would give this to?
That's a very good question. I would. We have a book group here. I would definitely give it to everyone in the book group to have a read of. But I would actually give it to anybody who read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, because that sold millions. So I'm sure everybody's got a copy. They may be using it to keep their bathroom door open, but it's this is condensed. For me, it's a much better book. Just from a writerly point of view, it's really, nothing is wasted. Everything is pared back. there are a number of little diversions and the Tristram Shandy style mini stories that she did in Jonathan Strange. This is one gripping tale from beginning to end. What
about you, Andrea? What's your gift that you would? Let's try that again. What book would you give as a gift to somebody?
Well, I've got two choices for today, and one would be for someone who I know likes reading, and I would give a fiction, like a novel to, and one would be for like other people who may or may not enjoy reading fiction as much as we all do, and you still have to give them something. So if I to start with a fiction novel, it was published last year, but I read it this year, and it's certainly on my list of the best books for this year. It's called Fleishman is in Trouble. I don't know if you read that. Did you read it?
I kept hearing a lot about that one.
I mean, it's fantastic. It's by Taffy Brodesser-Akner, which has such a tricky name for me to remember. But it's just so well written, and it all begins with Toby Fleishman. He wakes up in his flat in New York. His very nice flat in New York, thank you very much. And he finds that his ex-wife has dropped off the kids in his flat during the night while he was sleeping and just disappeared. So he was all set for like a weekend of his new single divorced life, dating wildly, seeing the kids on weekends, and, having quite a nice life as a moderately successful doctor in New York. But then this particular weekend, he then kind of annoyed goes, oh, okay, I have to change my plans then because I've got the kids unexpectedly. And he calls his ex-wife and she doesn't pick up the phone. So he gets through the weekend thinking that she would turn up on the Sunday night to pick them up again. And she doesn't. And she basically has just disappeared. He can't get hold of her. He calls her secretary or assistant or whoever it may be at her work, who just says, oh, yeah, I can take a message. So he now has to parent full-time, single parent full-time. And he's been an active dad. He's been involved in his kid's life. And he thinks that he's got this, but he starts to find that the parenting takes a toll on his actual life routine. He is suddenly finding it quite difficult to juggle everything, and dating isn't really an option when you've got two kids full time, and his bosses are not so understanding when he has to take his kids with him to work. And this is all the setup, and I can't really tell you a lot about what's going to happen without giving it away. And it's such a phenomenal book. There's a point in the book where there's one sentence where everything you think you know just changes. And from that point on, for the rest of the novel, it's like someone has taken out your eyeballs and swapped them for new eyes. Because you just, everything you see with a completely different view. And it's just super clever. And when you get to the conclusion of this book, you're just absolutely, it's like you're hit by a speeding bus. And when all of that sort of, that whirlwind of emotion settles, you're just absolutely gobsmacked by how clever she is, how incredible she is to have put together this phenomenal story. And I just want everybody to read it so we can talk about it. But this is one of those situations where I want to give it to everybody because I love it, but I'm not sure I'd give it to everybody because I'm not sure they would love it as much. So I would suggest that it's a great, great, great present for people who are women who like reading fiction in particular, career women, mothers, people who have opinions on equality, perhaps.
Okay.
And it's brilliant.
You've reminded me of another category of book that I was so focused on the short stories, fairy tales side of things because of research for today that I completely forgot that I do get people novels. But what I tend to do is there's a category that I call, it's not particularly exciting, it's enjoy on the day. So I often try and get people comfort reads or kind of quick reads like you've just described. You know, you'd race through something like that. You know, sounds like it's got a really good twist, like you don't see coming, something like that. So I'd get them like a fun thriller if they were into thrillers, or I think I've given the Rosie Project to quite a few people in my life as well. And I think one of my favorite purchases for somebody was The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole, age 13 3/4. So I think if you understand someone's sense of humor and you manage to get a book that taps into that, or a quick light read that they can like flick through on Christmas Day or whenever they have some free time, I think that's another category of book that I go for as well, light and fun.
Yeah. What have you got for today? Have you got a collection of short stories?
I do. I have two, and I'll briefly tell you about them. So I've done a Venn diagram for the first one because I actually don't have a copy to show you. So this is completely useless for anybody listening, and I realise how stupid that is at this moment. So for anybody watching on YouTube, here is the Venn diagram, and it says here, people who like cooking and people who like books. And in the middle, the perfect middle here, we have something called the Little Library Cookbook by Kate Young.
That's genius. And I'm just going to copy that for my next recommendation.
Fantastic. Like to be inspiring with my Venn diagrams.
Yes.
So the Little Library Cookbook by Kate Young actually began as a blog called the Little Library Cafe, I believe. And then obviously so many recipes on the blog, it developed into a book, was really, really popular. And it is what it says, what you would imagine it would be from the title. So she has a collection of books at home. She loves literature. She also loves cooking. And what she did was she went through all of these books and decided to try and recreate the recipes. And for some of those recipes, it's quite clear what the food is and quite easy to replicate and make. For some of them, all she has to go on is a name of something that's mentioned in the book, and she has to kind of be creative and come up with it herself. But for example, if you've ever wanted to have Paddington's marmalade, you'll find a recipe for it in the Little Library Cookbook. And before each recipe, she includes the little paragraph or excerpt that she's found in the book that she's got the recipe from, and the little description of how she interpreted that in the book, what the book means to her. Often there's a lot of like childhood memories in there as well, and then there's a recipe that you can make. So it's a really lovely read, as well as something that you can use if you love a particular book and you say you like Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. You can have the afternoon tea from Rebecca. You can put that together. And I know how much you love Northern Lights, Andrea, by Philip Pullman.
Yep.
So one bit that I wanted to read to you was a recipe that she got from there. And to give you an idea of how the book is written. So also, side note, the Little Library Christmas with 20 of the original recipes and 30 new ones came out in October this year, if anybody's looking for something a little more Christmassy. So this is an excerpt for a hot chocolate that comes from Northern Lights. I think you remember it wasn't called hot chocolate, it was called, do you remember?
No, I remember the wine they were drinking in Oxford.
It was called Cioccolato. Although you can actually buy that wine.
Yeah, it's like an Eastern European wine.
Yes,
isn't it?
Exactly.
Top something.
Tokai.
Tokai.
Yes, that's right.
And the chocolate is chocolatl after the Aztec, no? Or the Inca or whatever.
Well, you know more about the origins of the word than I do. So this is what she said about kind of where the recipe came from. She said, I was recently having dinner with a friend when I happened to mention that hot chocolate always makes me think of Mrs. Coulter. She looked at me blankly, and I realized with a jolt that she hadn't yet read the books. She had them all ahead of her. I was instantly jealous. I think we can empathize with that. By the time we reached my front door, I was dreaming about making the perfect hot chocolate, one that was dark, rich, sweet, and heavily spiced. I spent the next week playing around with recipes, enjoying the warmth that the thimblefuls of differently spiced hot chocolate provided. The recipe below is a new favourite, the perfect weapon for Mrs. Coulter, or if you have slightly less sinister plans, dessert for you and a friend.
Do you not think, actually, this book would be a brilliant book to get if you wanted to do a bookish dinner party, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
You could theme each course around a different book because there was a key recipe within it.
Yeah, also ties into another trend that I'm quite fond of, which is buy gifts for yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
I support that.
All right, so The Little Library Cookbook by Kate Young. It's a book I recommend all the time. Great choice for Christmas, but also beyond.
Do you have a second book, Mark?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. And it's not new. It's not from this year. It's from 1870. But it's a book I put off until this year for all the reasons that we've been talking about long books being, having this delay factor. And it's Middlemarch by George Eliot.
Oh, wow.
And, it was always on all the lists at school and I never read it. And Virginia Woolf says it's the only novel written for grown-ups, in the English language and all this kind of stuff. So eventually I got round to it and I realized that actually if someone had sold it to me in a different way, then I would have read this. I'd have read this 5 times already. If someone had said, this is the best soap opera you've ever read, I might have gone for it, right? To start off with. Not that I'm a great fan of soap opera, but it's got all the hallmarks of a great soap opera. So you think about it, right? The great soap operas, Dallas, Emmerdale, Coronation Street, they're all about places, right? They all start with a place name. And Middlemarch is this kind of, this Falcon Crest of Middle England. It's actually modelled on Coventry, I'm told, from near there. So maybe there's an affinity. But there's a kind of this little world in which there are so many intrigues, and which the background of the Great Reform Act is seething away the rivalries between the different classes, the manufacturing interests, the new scientific kind of discoveries. All of this is bubbling away underneath this fantastic plot line. Now, the reason that I really would put this right to the top of all the best soap opera ever is that George Eliot writes with such intelligence and kindness. All of her characters, yes, they have vices and virtues in different mixes, but they're members of your family, they're neighbours, they're people you know. There's a realism to them which is exquisite. And bearing in mind it was written in the middle of the 19th century. The characters are so real, it actually makes Dickens look like a cartoon strip. That's how I felt when I kind of finished it. It's actually a good antidote if you don't like Dickens. There are a number of great characters drawn through it, but the main one, there are 2. Dorothea Brooke, who is the heroine, is intelligent. She is graceful. I think she's probably George Eliot. But she's got a blind side. She can't see the passion that others have for her. She's emotionally naive. She gives her a tremendous dimension. And then Dr. Lydgate, who's another male lead, he's a hero of modern medicine, knocking down the old, quackery of the 18th century. He wants to dispense modern medicine and bring the world forward, kill cholera, etc., etc. Yet, he is a fool for love. So there are all of these wonderful mixes in the characters. And there's the epitome of evil, Raffles, is the source of all the secrets kind of unravel. But the big baddie is not Raffles, it's money. Because all of the bad stuff that comes out of Middlemarch has come about because of financial chicanery, the wrong will, the right will, the fraud, all of this stuff that is again, a sign of the times where money was becoming more important. You know, it was all about. But you know, the question is, will goodness conquer all in the end? And over 800 pages, you know, it manages to just George Eliot manages to keep your attention and keep you absolutely spellbound. And even liking the kind of neutral and negative characters. You know, she did. I think she's absolutely masterful, and I wish I discovered this, you know, many years ago.
Yeah.
Have you read it, Annabelle?
Yes. And it's not a book I would ever want to reread, but I just partly because I remember reading it for assigned reading for university, and I was dreading it, you know, because of the way it had been presented. And the feeling that I am still left with when I think about Middlemarch is just this overwhelming sense of what a perfect book. And every time I think about it, I still can't believe that a human being wrote it, because like you said, it's full of such empathy for all of its characters. And I sometimes, I think when I was reading that, you know, it's one of those books where you can't believe that they aren't real. And you expect them to just walk through the door. And I felt that about the Goldfinch as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I think empathy maybe that's one of the reasons why, particularly right now, a book like Middlemarch actually grips you a bit more, because, you know, empathy is the quality that I think we're all looking for, we're all discovering, we're all developing, we're all trying to encourage, you know, with friends and colleagues, and you know, it seems to be the thing that the world needs now, right? And so I suspect that empathy books will do well.
On the last episode of the Boundless Book Club, that's what we were talking about.
That's true. Yeah.
Well, I wasn't, but I think Andrea, Ahlam, Isabel, and Mimi Nicklin were. So do check out that episode if you haven't already and you are listening or watching.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I will do.
So second book for you, Andrea.
Yeah. So just because I don't want to be outdone, this is my diagram.
Beautiful.
For anyone watching it, yes, it took me a long time to prepare. What you can see on my diagram, for everybody who's only listening, it's really quite stunning. It's
gorgeous.
Far superior, yeah. Health, books, and food. And then in the middle, where they all intersect, you get The Doctor's Kitchen by Dr. Rupy Aujla, who is an actual real doctor who's written a book about how to eat for health effectively. Earlier today, I was listening, as I was driving, I was listening to a podcast where they're talking about how we all seek out the information that confirms our bias. So that's why I've highlighted this little bit where it talks about how good cinnamon is for you, because that's kind of the bias that I want to see confirmed always. Cinnamon is aromatic, antioxidant packed, flavor bomb. It's good. It's got anti-inflammatory qualities, improves metabolic syndrome, whatever that might be. And also it's like the most delicious thing. So if Dr. Rupy says we should eat it, then I'm all for it. So the first part of the book explains how certain ingredients are good for you and why. And then you get to the second half of the book, which is all recipes. And you get things like this. I'm showing a picture of a beautiful lemongrass curry, Thai curry. And it's got lots of different recipes that all look wonderful. I don't really cook very much, but they look great. And this is a sort of book that I think you could give to pretty much anyone, even if they don't like books. I can't think anyone who would want to cancel a friendship after receiving this. So that's my top tip.
That's always good, especially if you're under time pressure. It's like, what would they not hate?
Yes. And also, if you give it to someone who doesn't like it, it's a great gift for them to give on to someone else without telling you.
Re-gift potential. That's we haven't got time to even go into that. That's a very good point.
What's yours?
Okay, so my second book, very quickly, it's The Merry Spinster by Daniel Mallory Lavery. And it is subtitled Tales of Everyday Horror. And yes, this is a book that I would give to somebody during the festive period. So I would give it to anybody who likes, say, The Nightmare Before Christmas or Krampus, or kind of festivity, but with a dark twist. So I don't have a Venn diagram for this one, but my flowchart would be, do you like fairy tales? If yes, are you a little bit twisted? Yes, read this book. And it basically tackles fairy tales that you'd be familiar with. So if I just open the book very quickly, I'll give you an idea. And it's not just fairy tales, it's also childhood stories as well that are tackled. So you've got The Little Mermaid is tackled, you've got Cinderella, all of those kind of classic ones, with a dark twist. Now some are a bit more straightforward than others, as you get with fairy tale retellings. And the thing that I think makes them a good gift, retellings of myths and fairy tales, is that there is a sense of comfort in them, no matter how dark they are. Because especially if they are myths and tales that person is familiar with from their culture, then there will be a sense of, okay, I know where I am with this. But there's also a sense of, okay, but what have they done with it? You know, what's new, what's fresh? So it's familiar, but it's also new. And one story in particular that I was going to read from to give you an idea of how it can be properly chilling is my favorite story of the collection. And it's the reason why, even if I didn't like any of the other stories, I would still recommend it. It's his retelling of The Velveteen Rabbit, which I think is a universally loved children's story. Lovely, happy, beautiful story. And in this collection, it's entirely ruined. So the rabbit is a rather sinister rabbit. And after I read this, I had to go and watch something a bit happy because it really freaked me out. You're welcome. So the rabbit is talking to another toy in the toy room in which we find him. And he's asking all sorts of questions about how do you become real from a toy that has managed to do that. He says, "Can you take someone else's reel?" he asked. "Or are you stuck having to get it brand new each time on your own?" The skin horse looked at the rabbit then. "What I mean is," the rabbit said carefully, and his voice was a crawling black thing across the floor, "if something else was already real, could you take it from them and keep it for yourself?" "No," the skin horse said, "you can't take real from another toy." A truth which was no small relief to the skin horse, who was no fool and could tell in what direction the conversation was tending. But the rabbit had not yet finished with his questions. "Can you take the real out of a boy then?" And then it continues. Yeah.
That's like Tim Burton on the page.
Yeah, so it's that sort of thing. If you like Nightmare Before Christmas, that sort of thing. It's a great collection. Not just at festive time, but just beyond. Yeah, so that's my second recommendation. Properly creepy.
Brilliant. That's a great way to end this happy gifting episode.
I need another Venn diagram.
That's all for today. We hope this has inspired you to give a few more books to the important people in your life, whether it's for birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, or seasonal celebrations. We'd also like to know if you've ever been given a book that you love that was very meaningful to you as a gift, or indeed, have you ever been given a book that has ruined your friendship or relationship to the gift giver? Please let us know on social media or send us an email. You can send an email to comms@emiratesLitFest.com. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been great. And thank you for your recommendations. Thanks for tuning in. Next time, we will be looking at some fantastic and unexpected combinations of books that make the perfect companion pieces. Does that sound strange? Because it might well be. So don't forget to hit subscribe and make sure you don't miss it. That is all for now. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.